think he is, but I'll call you later. I'll check just to make sure. But I said I'm pretty sure because I remember I said there were a lot of players, but I think he was. And she said he was a center and he was stocky. Of course he was. And so I called her and I told her, so she's gonna get it.
Oh, that's great. I thought his son, he was also pretty tall.
Well, thank you everybody for coming today. We call this session Our Town Stories That Shape San Antonio. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that both of our authors will be signing books immediately after the session in the reference area on the second floor. I think when you go up to the second floor, it's going to be on your left. And a portion of the proceeds from the sales benefit the San Antonio Public Library Foundation. My name is Gilbert Garcia, and I'm a Metro columnist with the San Antonio Express News. And I'm really honored to be here today with two authors who have books about San Antonio, and they're very different stories, but I think that they're basically both stories about cultural outsiders in the city who, through hard work and ingenuity, excelled in this community. To my left, Nick Kotz is an author, historian, and a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. His latest book, The Harness Maker's Dream, tells the story of his grandfather, who emigrated from Russia in 1890 and ended up in San Antonio in 1899. And the book is a finalist for the Texas Institute of Letters Carr P. Collins Award for Nonfiction. To my right, Ignacio Garcia is a professor of Western and Latino history at Brigham Young University, and the author of 5 books, including his latest, When Mexicans Could Play Ball. And it tells the story about the Lanier basketball team, which had great success in the 1930s, 1940s. And Ignacio is a graduate of Lanier. And I think we have a lot of Lanier graduates here, and we're really glad to have you here. Now, Nick, I'll start with you. Your book tells the story of your grandfather, and as I said, he came from Russia in 1890 to the United States, and there was a big wave, as you write about in the book, a big wave of immigration among the Jews of Eastern Europe, and basically trying to escape the oppression that they were facing at that time. And what are your memories of your grandfather, and what inspired you at this point to tell the story?
The memories of my grandfather, Nathan Kallison, is that my mother and I, when I was a little boy, lived with my grandparents just off Hildebrand in Olmus Park. He took me out to the ranch every Sunday. My mother dropped Papa Kallison and I off at the Uptown Theater every Saturday morning to watch the shoot-'em-ups. But this is the point. I was a smart-ass kid, little kid, who made an A in Texas history in the 6th grade. And until I started researching this book, I knew more about Sam Houston and the Texas Revolution than I knew about the revolution that he escaped and the revolution of the Industrial Revolution that was taking place in San Antonio. Why did I write the book? Essentially, 2 people got me going. One of them is just a great author and thinker by the name of Char Miller. Mm-hmm. He was here at Trinity, and now he's at Pomona, and he's inspired me. And the other person is Mary Lynn Kotz, sitting there, best-selling author, who insisted that I write this book.
Well, thank you. We're glad you did. Now, Ignacio, the period that you're chronicling, as I said, it covers 1928 to 1945. You, I believe, graduated in 1969 from Lanier, and from what I understand, until a few years ago, you didn't know much about this period in Lanier basketball. What made you aware of it, and what made you decide you wanted to write this book?
Well, I was writing my first book, which was, most of my work is on politics, Mexican-American, Chicano politics, and civil rights. But I was interviewing state legislator, former state legislator Joe Bernal, who's sort of an icon here in San Antonio. And we were doing I was doing my first book. And so during the changing of tapes, I'm not sure if it was me or my research assistant who asked him, well, where did you graduate from? And he said, Lanier. And I said, well, I'm on the Lanier right too. And then so we started talking a little bit about Lanier before we got on to our politics. And he mentioned he had been on the basketball team. And of course, 69, 68, we weren't very good at basketball. In fact, the first few years I went to Lanier, we weren't very good in too many things. Individually, we had some very good players, but team-wise, we sort of struggled a bit. And so when he mentioned that he had been in a team that had gone to the state playoffs, and that had actually been a team before that had won the state title, and a team after his that had won the state title, I was really interested. And I had been a sports writer for about a little bit less than a year. So that was a very interesting story, but I said, I'm into politics, I'm into civil rights, so I'm going to leave that somewhere back. But as all of you who are Lanierites, we always want to give back. There's a sense of loyalty to Lanier that is incredible. So when I finished my 5th book, I said, you know what, I'm going back and I'm going to do the research. And it was incredible because then I began to know things about Lanier that I had only imagined. And one of the things I did is I collapsed both periods in a way because there were so many similarities. The principal back then was a principal when I started school. The assistant principal was the assistant principal back then. And when I started school, and one of the players was my biology teacher. So in some ways, I was destined to write the book.
Okay, thank you. Now, Nick, your grandfather came to San Antonio in 1899, I believe, and
Right.
he set up his shop, and he was making harnesses and saddles. Set up his shop at 124 South Flores. Is that correct? I think it was.
You read some of this?
I actually did read some of it. I guilty. No, I really enjoyed the book, I was. People who have been here for a while will know. I mean, this is close to City Hall and the county courthouse, and this is where he set up his shop. But before that, he had spent a few years in Chicago and joined family members who were already in Chicago. And if you could talk a little bit about what made him decide to come to San Antonio, and what as we mentioned before, he was escaping the oppression that Jews were facing in Eastern Europe at that time when he left in 1890. What did he find in Chicago, and what was San Antonio like compared to Chicago at that time?
In Chicago, in the early 1890s, he started a one-man, one-room harness shop in the midst of the greatest depression this country's ever had until the 1930s. Mm-hmm. 2 of his children were born there. He started that shop when he was 21 years old. He lived on the near west side of Chicago, in which every ethnicity from Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Western Europe were packed in together, these enclaves of people. There was rampant disease, including tuberculosis, of which my grandmother was scared to death. And he noticed something happening on the streets of Chicago. These vehicles were coming down, putt, down the street. They were automobiles. And he said, hey, wait a minute.
Everything's changing.
Everything's changing. And his whole life was anticipating change. Mm-hmm. And in Texas, the horse was still king. And San Antonio at that time, we're talking about late 19th, early 20th century, was a haven of sanatoriums for people who had TB or wanted health cures. San Antonio was supposed to have this marvelous, healthy climate. So those 2 factors brought him here.
Now, in the book, you talk about how many people who came from Russia and other parts of Eastern Europe got to Chicago and then found that the treatment they received there was as bad, if not worse, and some went back or left. And of course, your grandfather did not do that. What was the climate like as someone who had come from Eastern Europe only a few years before? and who was Jewish in